Let's talk about doing one key thing that is so simple that over time can make a huge shift in becoming the person that you want to become. So I learned this many years ago when I was living out of my car, quite happily in some ways, but I would also say I was ignorant, living out of my car and everything around me was a mess, right? Physically. Like I lived out of my car, so I was wearing the same clothes that I'd worn every day for days on end. I was quite stinky. Believe it or not, I didn't have a girlfriend at that time. And I was just traveling around the U.S., living out of my car, sleeping on the ground, in that kind of like ignorance is bliss kind of way. I was doing like feverish rock climbing and backpacking and being outside and throwing myself in the mountains. And I found happiness in that way, but it was very roller coastery, right? Like high highs and low lows. So I thought of this because I'm traveling today. I'm in a cafe somewhere in the world, and I felt compelled to share this with you. So you'll notice there's some background music, and you'll see how I'm dressed. And all of this is to say is that our external environment both reflects and creates our inner world. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that if our outer world is a mess, then that is usually a reflection of our inner state and also is creating a certain level of chaos, complexity, let's say it, lack of neatness in our inner world. So if we're wanting to feel more stable internally and more predictable and more unshakable, make our physical environment mirror and express how we want to be feeling inside. So again, like years ago when I was doing this, what was fascinating is that as I became more stable, more happy, more joyful, more peaceful, I felt this compelling urge to make my physical environment like that, like neat, tidy, uncluttered. I just threw away a bunch of stuff. I was like, I don't need this, I don't need that, and everything had its place. Now, I would say I'm more on the rigid side of that at this point, because when things are not in the right place, I get a little, like not super excited about that. So I think there is a balance there on remaining flexible, and this principle has never left me, because now my room, and maybe I'll show it to you next time I'm done, but you can see here, it's like things are very orderly. I feel very comfortable here, clean, tidy, neat, because that's what I want to feel inside. I want to feel serene, peaceful, organized per se, right? Now that's just one dimension of our physical life that we can transform that'll support a transformation internally. The other place that we can look are relationships, circumstances, and then finally our inner state. And all of that actually creates our inner state to an extent, right? So in our relationships, how do you tidy your relationships? How do you make them clean? Well, it starts with, believe it or not, you or me in this case, right? How can I become clear about what I want to communicate, and how I want my relationships to be? Now, here's the amazing thing about relationships. They are a reflection of what we put into them and what's inside of us, right? I see this to this day, right? The people that I'm closest with are fantastic overall. They have beautiful intents around wanting to serve the world and serve me and be connected with me and be transparent and be vulnerable and take ownership. And all of that is because that's something that's very important to me and something I've practiced and continue to practice. On the other hand, there are also people in my life that had a certain level of rigidity, reactivity, freneticness. Now, this is probably like the 10 or 20% of how they are, but it's fascinating because I see it in them. And even though it's compelling to see it in them and to want to tell them about that, I resist. And the first thing that I do is look inside around how I have those qualities myself, especially if I'm not tending to those qualities that I see as unhelpful in them. I'm not tending to those qualities inside of myself. Now, this is a key to manifesting relationships in your environment to mirror and reflect the goodness that's inside of you. Look first at yourself, at the things that trigger you on the outside or the things that you don't appreciate. Just take a moment and look within. Because for me, I get too rigid, I can be frenetic, I can be more reactive, right? And it's easier to see it on the outside sometimes. This is actually the definition of a projection. The projection is the unowned aspect of ourselves that we don't want to see, that's way easier to see in somebody else. So if there are things out in the world that you get really triggered by constantly all the time, almost for sure, and I might even say for sure, there are those aspects of yourself, those aspects that you see outside are inside of you and it's hard to see them. Or you're like, I'm never like that. I would never be like that. And the truth of it is the way that psychology works is that if we get triggered by it on the outside, it exists inside of us. Now, it might be a different manifestation. One of the most common ones that I work with is people not appreciating and maybe even hating violence on the outside, right? War, violence towards others, terror towards others, which is understandable. I don't appreciate that at all or accept that at all. And at the same time, if we get really triggered by it and furious and angry or really sad about it, look inside around how we might be violent with ourselves. And most often when people get very upset about violence towards others in the outside world, it's because they haven't yet seen how they can be violent in their own way towards themselves. Because they're usually not that violent towards other people, but most of the time they are just brutal towards themselves. They don't see that. They don't see how critical they are of themselves. They don't see how it's so hard to love and accept themselves. Pieces like that, right? So again, all of this is navigated through compassion and through care and through love, right? So if you do these two things, meaning take a look at your external state and see how it reflects and creates your inner state, and two, take a look at your relationships and clean those up in the same kind of way through owning our projections and through just for a minute, taking a look at how we get triggered by the things out there in them and look at how they are in us, everything in your world is going to be transformed. All right, all my best.